Man dressed as Ulysses S. Grant in civilian clothes enters, sits at a table, and removes his hat. A multicolored patchwork quilt hangs in the background.
Hello, I'm Captain Ulysses S. Grant, late of the United States Army, presently of Whitehaven, Missouri, near St. Louis and Jefferson Barracks. I am living in Whitehaven with my wife Julia and my two boys. It is her home since birth, and she was reared here. So when I left the Army, I came back here to take up farming. And we are embarking on a life as farmers. But after 15 years, people asked me why I had left the Army. And I should like to think back a bit and tell you about the events the last couple of years of my Army career and explain to you why I left the Army and what happened to me in that couple of years. The war was over, the Mexican War, in 1848. Julia and I married in St. Louis in August of 1848. And in the next couple of years, we had assignments in Detroit and Sackett's Harbor, New York, back and forth. We had our first child, Fred, was born on May the 30th of 1850. And we were quite happy. But in the late spring of 52, I received orders to go with the 4th United States Infantry to the Oregon Territory at Fort Vancouver on the Columbia River. I wanted to take Julia, but I couldn't, for a couple of reasons. The first reason, most pressing, was that in June of 1852, Julia was heavily pregnant with our second child, and I was to leave on July the 5th, and we knew that it was only days before she would give birth, and we were going by way of the Isthmus of Panama, and that is a green hell of a jungle with mosquitoes and bandits, malaria, bad weather, rampaging rivers, and it was no place for a mother with a newborn. It's a good thing that Julia did not go with us, because I caught a fever myself on that crossing of the isthmus, and we lost about a third of the men, women, and children of our command, the 4th Infantry, in that crossing. Cholera hit us really hard, so it's good that Julia and the children weren't there. Another reason that she couldn't come was I simply couldn't afford a wife and two children on my lieutenant's salary. I was making $480 a year, and even though the government was giving me an increased allotment of $197, that still wasn't enough money to support a wife and two children. So I had high hopes of raising the money while I was there. En route there, my second son, Buck, was born on July 22nd. I found this out after I had arrived at Fort Vancouver in early October. I got the news. I arrived at Fort Vancouver on September 20th, and shortly thereafter I got news that on July 22nd, Julia had brought forth another son, and he was called Buck. He's Ulysses S. Grant Jr., but he was born at my parents' home in Ohio. And he's the only one of our children that was not born at Whitehaven. But since he was born in Ohio, he was dubbed a son of the Buckeye State, hence the nickname Buck, and it stuck. Julia resisted that, but to no avail. He has been Buck since birth, and I expect he'll be Buck till death. So I had that son 17 days after I left New York, so it would have been a nightmare to have Julia with me. We made the crossing. As I said, we lost about a third of our command. That trip in and of itself is another tale to tell another time. But on September the 15th, we finally got to San Francisco. And a town at that time, as I recall, was some 20,000 inhabitants. It had grown almost overnight from a small village to a town of 20,000 or more because of the gold rush. Indeed, we were going to the Oregon Territory to serve essentially as a police force for the 49ers out there. And I progressed on to Columbia Barracks on the Columbia River, and on September 20th, I arrived at Columbia Barracks. It was a beautiful place. I liked it very much. The scenery. Had a reunion with a classmate of mine, Rufus Ingalls. Ruf and I had a hail fellow well met time. Several other men that I had served with in the Mexican War, other officers were there. So I had pleasant surroundings and pleasant memories, but I was missing my wife, and now I knew 2 sons, and that was driving me to distraction. I tried to keep busy, and indeed I kept busy being the quartermaster, outfitting expeditions and so forth. I even outfitted an expedition for George McClellan. He came through to do an Army survey for a potential railroad route through that area, and tried to keep busy. But every time I got a letter from Julia, and I got about 1 letter from her for every 4 that I wrote. But Julia has a condition in her left eye called strabismus, and her left eye is crossed almost to the bridge of her nose. And so since we have binocular vision, to read or write is a painful exercise for her. Indeed, I read to her a great deal in the evenings before I left, because she likes for me to read to her, and I enjoy reading to her, but it's a good way for her to be entertained and to get her news. But when I got one of her 2 rare letters, she would send me locks of the boys' hair, and she would outline their little hands in pencil on the page. And that was killing me, because as you would imagine, every time I got a letter, the hands, particularly the boy that I'd never seen, the hands were getting bigger. Now that's where I made, it's not an excuse, but it's a reason. I did some drinking, because I did what too many soldiers, indeed too many people do, to self-anesthetize and kill pain. And when I got a letter, particularly one of those letters with the little hand outlines, I would go down to the sutler, get a gallon of popsicle for 25 cents and drink the pain away. My housekeeper would tell my fellow officers that I don't think Captain Grant's going to make it. I had been breveted captain for bravery in the Mexican War, so I carried the title. And she would say, I don't think Captain Grant's going to make it, because they would say that you could hear me sobbing outside my cabin reading those letters. So I was having a difficult time missing my wife and children. Well, I was hanging on in the Army because I hadn't really contemplated another career, another way to make a living. And now I've got a wife and 2 children. the Army wasn't paying well, but it was steady money. It was all indeed I knew as an adult. I'd been involved with the Army since I was 17. And I was writing Julia letters about possibly resigning. I would tell her that every time I think about resigning, I think all I can see is poverty staring me in the face. But the desire to get back home and see my babies and my wife was becoming stronger than my desire to grit it out and stay with the Army. But I also wanted to stay in the Army because I was hoping to make captain. We read the newspapers from back east, and we all feel there is a war coming. And I felt that I just might need that rank of captain in the future. It might come in handy. The difficulty was that in our Army at that time, rank was glacial, so slow in coming. Somebody ahead of you had to die, either in combat or sickness or old age. So it became a lockstep as somebody ahead of you died. And as grim as that is, that was the case. And I knew that I was getting close in my positions of ranking and billets that were available. And I made the best of it at Fort Vancouver. Now, I tried several different ways to make money while I'm waiting for a rank to open up for me. And those efforts are a time for us to get together at a later time and let me regale you with that tale, because I tried cutting wood for steamers. I tried growing potatoes and corn to sell to the Army and to the miners. I tried selling chickens. They all died, to the businesses in San Francisco. Tried selling ice. That didn't work. I tried any number of activities, and I invested in a boarding house. And the fellow took my and our other officers' monies and absconded, and we haven't seen him to this day. So everything I tried to do to bring money in, to bring Julia to me, came to naught. And not because I had made a poor business decision, but because circumstances around each of those decisions caused them to go wrong. So I was really frustrated. And after well over a year at Fort Vancouver, I'm still no closer to getting Julia and my children out there with me. But in August of 1853, August the 5th, it was official that I was promoted to captain. Captain W.S. Bliss had died and opened a billet for me. So as of August of 1853, I was a captain. With the notification of that promotion, though, I received orders to go to Fort Humboldt in California and report to Lieutenant Colonel Robert C. Buchanan. That concerned me because at that time, Captain Buchanan at Jefferson Barracks, Lieutenant Colonel Buchanan now, and I clashed at Jefferson Barracks, and there was some bad feeling between us, and he was now going to be my commanding officer. So I left Fort Vancouver on September 24th and to go to Fort Humboldt. I took my time getting there. I had some leave, I did some visiting, and I did not arrive at Fort Humboldt until January the 5th. I started a new year at Fort Humboldt, California, and was even more miserable there than I was at Fort Vancouver. In fact, I got there on January the 5th. In a letter that I wrote Julia on February the 6th, I told her I'm so down about the Army and my situation that I've been considering going nolens volens, which is a slang term for desert, just leave. But I couldn't do that. I could not bring myself to do that. But as early as a month after I had gotten to Fort Humboldt, I was already thinking about just leaving. Well, I hung on and tried to make the best of a bad situation. And there are rumors that I was told to either resign or be court-martialed. There's no truth to that, but that's a time at another time for us to talk, and I'll elaborate a bit on that. But on April the 11th, I got a letter from the Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, and that was my official notification that I was indeed promoted to rank of Captain of Regular Army. Now, April the 11th was a signal day for me. It was my 10th anniversary of having been a first lieutenant, and I'd been struggling to try to make the best of it, as I said. But when I got that letter in my hand saying, and it didn't make any difference, I had the rank several months. But when I got the official letter from the Secretary of War, I was moved to make the move. And I sat down and wrote a letter accepting the promotion to captain. And then I immediately wrote a letter resigning from the United States Army. So I secured the rank and then resigned. April 11th, I gave the letter, sent the letter for my resignation to take effect on May 31st next, and or July 31st, I'm sorry. I resigned to take effect July 31st, and the first week of May, I left the Fort Humboldt and began my trip back to New York City, in Kentucky, my parents' home, and then to Whitehaven to see my wife and 2 sons, one of whom I had not seen. And that journey is another tale that I should like to reflect about and talk with you at another time. That's my story about how I came to resign from the United States Army after 15 years of service, and what I was thinking as I did it. When I left Fort Humboldt, I told my fellow officers, if you look me up in 10 years, come to Missouri and you'll see that I'm a successful old Missouri farmer. That's where I'll be. That's what I'll be in 10 years. And I expect we'll have to see. So until we get together again, my friends, I bid you adieu.